know a lot of you guys have been here already to the last one, the previous meeting, but I just want to say a big welcome to the new faces, and lovely to see people again if they're coming for a second or third or fourth time. My name's Max. I am the co-host with Tom White, who you can hopefully see on the screen there. And usually Tom White is the main star of these. He's the founder. Been running these meetups for a few years now, I think, maybe 3 years. But he's a bit poorly, so I'm going to be taking over. And I'm also the main speaker today. I'm going to be talking about component-based architecture in Angular and how you can make your code a little bit more efficient and simple by using it. And then we also have Tom, who's going to be talking about configuration in monorepos. And then later on, we'll have Dhaval, who is going to be talking about a schematic that will let you move libs around much more easily than doing it manually. So yeah, if anyone has a question as I'm talking, feel free to either to be honest, just butt in. Yeah, if you have any questions, if you got any feedback, anything like that. And at the end, we'll be opening up to a little bit of a discussion process as well. So I'm going to share my screen and start my presentation. So can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Cool. So like I said, component-based architecture, and the goal with component-based architecture, or rather two of the benefits are efficiency in your working and also simplicity in your code. So let me first give you a little rundown about what component-based architecture is. I think a lot of you are going to be familiar with it already if you've used Angular or web components or React, or really just any of the sort of modern component-based frameworks. You'll have used it already. You'll know roughly what it's about. But if you're anything like me, it's hard to know how far you can take it. And I've found that the longer I use Angular, which incidentally has been since like version 1.8, something like that, a good maybe 5, can't remember exactly, but 4 or 5 years, something like that now. The more I use it, the more I find that building things in a component-based way really works nicely. I'm sort of breaking things up. And so I'll go on and talk about that in a bit more detail quite soon. So I just want to give you 3 loose definitions. So a rather abstract definition would be component-based architecture is about bringing the concept of single responsibility and the acronym DRY, don't repeat yourself, to the front end. A theoretical explanation might be that it's a code base where problems are broken down into decoupled, well-defined black box subproblems. And then practically, I would say it's designs, so graphic designs, UX designs, classes and functions that get broken down into lots of smaller components that do usually only one thing. So why would you use it? Well, it brings simplicity. I think that's probably the main thing. You can use separation of concerns and decoupling to make things much easier to understand. You get more productive because if you have reusable components, you give developers a whole tool set of components to use and leverage that will make them work faster. And then lastly, it can allow you to write more reliable code. So everything is smaller, it's more well defined. It has its specification clearly defined as well, and so things are easier to test and maintain. So that's almost all of the theoretical stuff. I'm going to get into some proper code examples quite soon. So I'll give you a couple of practical approaches. So the first one I'm going to talk about is smart versus dumb components. And I know I've talked about this quite a lot, but it just keeps coming up and this paradigm just keeps being really useful. And I think it's one of the most important things to know about when you come to start breaking things up into constituent elements. It gives you a bit of a framework about how to think about things and a starting point. So a DOM component, an example of that would be it's kind of like a UI building block. So like a button, an accordion, or even something domain based, like an invoice list item, for example. You would typically use input properties and output properties as opposed to services and Redux state, things like that, or calls to an API. And you would dispatch output events to sort of trigger changes and send them up the hierarchy. And any HTML and CSS is mostly presentational. So that's a DOM component. So you can sometimes also hear of DOM components called presentation components. Smart components, on the other hand, they use services. So they pull in data from maybe the API or the Redux store. They kind of create a patchwork of DOM components to build up the UI, and they pass the information into DOM components using inputs. Smart components have business logic, so they're more TypeScript heavy, whereas DOM components might be more HTML and CSS heavy. Smart components tend to map data into a format that DOM components understand, and that helps break the coupling between your components and make DOM components more reusable. Excuse me. And the HTML and CSS in a smart component is generally more structural. So positioning things, specifying widths and heights and margins and stuff like that. So I'm going to jump into the code now. I'm hoping, can you see VS Code at this point?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Brilliant. So the example I'm going to show you is this very contrived company page of my company called Mumford Tech, which it actually is called Mumford Technology. This is the tagline, which is not the real tagline, as you might guess. And so we've just got this banner at the top, some text at the top about us, a little YouTube video, a little bit more text, and then my fictitious team at the bottom. And so this in this example, this company profile page is just thrown together to demonstrate how like a use case that you might have. And I'm going to show you how you can break this down into smart versus DOM components. So just to I'll take you through the code first of all. So what I have is got this repo. We've got two modules in it because I've got two examples. So the first one is under this root. I'll show you the black box example in a little bit. So let's jump into here and jump into the routing. So we've got two components, before and after. So this is before and after the refactor. If we go into before, what you will see is not too much TypeScript in this project. So all we're doing is we're just grabbing the company, setting on the component, nothing too complicated. But if I show you the HTML, what you will notice is this is quite standard with how you might see things built by someone who is like a traditional web developer, someone who's come from maybe a WordPress background or PHP background or jQuery background, where, you know, in and of itself, it's quite understandable, you know, it's fairly clear, but there are a few issues. And so each of the issues I have commented in, which you'll see here, for example. And these are things that I'm going to try to address in this refactor. So we've got our header, and I've just noted here that the header is not reusable because it's tied to the company domain. So you'll see here that we are using outputting properties of the company object. So it's tightly coupled with the domain of a company. So we've got the text block and a video block and a little bit of complexity in here. Another note here saying each time we want to use this text block, we're repeating the HTML several times. So say I wanted to switch this to an H3, I'd have to do that in 3 different places.
Could you increase the font? Thank you.
The font size, is that better?
Yes. Yeah, a little bit more.
I might struggle a little bit to to show you the project, but is that okay?
Yeah. No, that's perfect, because the file names, they're not that important, but the
Okay, all
text,
right.
yeah, that's
I'll drop that
perfect.
down.
Thank you very much.
No problem. So yeah, so we would have to edit this in 3 places if we wanted to change it. And then down here, so this is our grid of images for the team members. This is kind of breaking single responsibility because, you know, this is, I mean, it's not complex, this stuff, but you can imagine this is a very contrived example. With a real world example, you're going to have a lot more complexity. And so your component's doing a lot of different things here. And then likewise with the CSS, you know, it's fine. It's just, there's lots of it. It's doing lots of different things. There's sort of repeated use of various variables and things like that, and breaking single responsibility. So this is how I wouldn't recommend coding stuff, and how when I first came to Angular, this is very much how I approach things, because, you know, that's just kind of makes sense. It's how you do it. The way I would do it now is, the first thing is you want to think about how you're going to break up the page. And so I just want to show you a quick example here. A little analogy that I find kind of useful is if you think about the components inside a computer. So, and then think about which ones are smart and which ones are dumb. So dumb components are, most of them, they are decoupled, they take inputs and they emit outputs. So the optical drive, for example, or the hard drive takes an input and then emits an output. The network card doesn't know about the RAM. The RAM doesn't know about the processor. The motherboard then is the smart component that pulls everything together, and then it makes everything work as one. So going back to our design, I would break this up by saying that obviously the smart component would be the page itself. So what you get routed to, what's in the router. And then the dumb components would be this banner at the very top, perhaps, with the text. One of the text blocks, the video component here, and then this image grid as well, I would say. So you've got 4 components there. And the cool thing about this is I've actually had a very similar use case to this in real life. And a lot of these components were needed to be reusable, so they could then be used to create a user profile page that looked quite consistent. And so by sort of taking this smart versus dumb component approach, you make things very reusable quite easily. So I'm going to show you now the alternative. So this is after the refactor. Again, very simple TypeScript, nothing really that interesting to look at here, apart from one thing actually. So in the DOM version, we had this DOM sanitizer, which created the YouTube URL, so we could then bind the video embed. That is now gone. So that's a little bit of complexity that's been abstracted out through single responsibility. And if we go into the HTML template, you will see that it's been refactored to be a lot more semantic. And so each one of these components is prefixed by the word profile, which I've taken that decision because they're kind of sort of related in their functionality. And each one just has domain agnostic inputs. So we've got the header, we have an input called heading, subheading, background image, instead of company name, tagline, and banner, for example. And the cool thing about doing this way is that everything becomes really semantic. So you can scan the tag names, and you can know pretty much exactly what's going on. There's much less repeated HTML, and a lot of the complexity is abstracted away. So even the image grid, for example, just becomes 2 components, which we then just loop over and then pass the data in. If I go to the CSS, again, this is a lot a lot less complex now. And when I mentioned earlier that smart component CSS is often very structural. So you'll notice that we have things like display or max width or margin, and these are all sort of external dimension type properties. We're not messing with the insides of the components here. The idea behind componentization is, while they can be configurable, you don't want to sort of be messing with the insides of a component. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about what the ways you can sort of approach that kind of customization. But for now, this works really nicely. It's quite clear, and yeah, it's a lot nice. Works out a lot nicer that way. So I'm going to take you quickly through the actual components themselves. Won't spend too long in there because they're all quite similar. Where am I trying to go? Yeah, okay. So I've got a UI folder here. This isn't necessarily how I would structure things, but for this example, it's fine. So I've got a UI folder. I've loosely grouped those components together in a folder called profile. And then each one is itself an Angular module. And so I've kind of followed the same approach as they take in material, where each component is its own module. And the reason for that is, rather than bundling them all in one giant module, if you split them out like that, it can make your bundles a little bit leaner. So here, for example, we have the header component. And if I go in here, you will see 3 input properties, which again are decoupled from the domain. So it knows nothing about companies. So when I come to create the user profile component, I just pass in the user data in here. It doesn't know anything about users, doesn't know anything about companies. That decoupling is what makes it reusable. And yeah, there's very little in here. The other 3, again, if I open up profile video, it has a module, single module with a single component. And the sanitizer, it has been sort of moved to one side and bundled into the profile video component, so the parent component doesn't have to know about it. So that's it for that one example. And I think the real takeaway with this is to stop thinking about things in terms of pages, elements, and CSS classes, and start thinking about them in terms of components. And so for me, that was the shift in mindset that really helped me understand these things, particularly making that transition from sort of a regular, standard web developer to a more modern one using these kinds of component-based web frameworks. Okay, so the next thing I want to take you through is this is the second approach you can take, and I like to call it black box components. And so the idea behind a black box component is your component is kind of it's like an unknown black box. You don't know how it does what it does, but you know what inputs you can put in, and you know what you will get out. And the cool thing about this is that all of the inner workings will be abstracted away. And this kind of concept is very, very common, particularly, backend developers use it all the time. But it's not so, people just don't think of it so much when it comes to sort of front-end development, particularly HTML and CSS. But a lot of the concepts that work very well on the back end also work very well on the front end. So a black box component should be decoupled. And so, i.e., it should not be reliant on domain logic as much as possible. There are obviously exceptions to this rule. So say you were building a reusable component to display an invoice list item, then obviously it would be coupled with the concept of an invoice. But as far as it can be, it should be decoupled. It should be reusable. So it shouldn't, it should be sort of flexible in the way it's built, and it should be not context specific. So it should be able to be dropped in as far as possible, sort of anywhere where you might need it. And there's a few tools you can use to do this. So again, you would use inputs to take in data as opposed to services, outputs to dispatch events. you should define interfaces as your public contract to your component if your component takes in complex data. And I'll show an example of that in a second. If you want your component to be stylistically customizable, so maybe you want to change the background color, then you can define CSS variables and then expose those to which is a sort of an interface for developers to be able to customize your styling. And then finally, you can use flexible HTML and CSS to make your component as sort of reusable and context unspecific as possible. So let me show you the example first of all. So what we have is this really boring accordion of different food types. And each accordion item has a title, an icon, a color, and then just a little bit of text that I stole from Wikipedia. So yeah, pretty simple, but I'm going to show you how I built it in a black box way, and then utilized these notions, inputs, outputs, interfaces, CSS variables, and flexible HTML and CSS to try to achieve those characteristics. Okay, so if I try to find that component, okay, so we've got this module, our black box component. This is the smart component. This is the page. So in here, I will show you the HTML first. So all we have is the accordion component, a bunch of items. We're iterating over the items and passing in the data via an input, and then displaying our text here. So if I open up the TypeScript, the first thing you'll probably see, if I direct your attention here, is we've got our accordion items array, and we're just grabbing that from this method. But this method might, because this is a smart component, maybe you're making an API request and then mapping data to the format that the accordion component understands. So in this particular case, you'll see this item view model. If I go to the top, this is just an interface that extends accordion item data with a single extra property, which is just the text. So I'm just going to jump back to the HTML again. You will see the data is passed in via the data property, and then the text is just rendered via projected content within the accordion item itself. So fairly straightforward. And CSS wise, I've jumped ahead. Ignore the CSS for 2 seconds. Okay, so I'm going to go in here now. I've got an accordion folder, and that has a module which declares 2 components, accordion component and accordion item component. The accordion component really is basically just an empty shell with some projected content and some CSS, so we can pretty much disregard that. The interesting part is the accordion item. So if I go into the TypeScript, first of all, you'll see that we have the exported data interface here. And so this is what allows you to have a strongly typed definition of your data inside your smart component where you do that mapping. So it's well defined and it's exported. And so we actually expect that to come through our data input at this stage here. So the cool thing about doing it this way is it's decoupled because you're using public well-defined interfaces and types. And it's reusable because it's sort of domain agnostic. It's not tied to any specific domain language. So let's go into the HTML. Pretty straightforward. We are basically just rendering out what we've had inputted, and that's more or less it. There's another cool thing in the CSS. So you'll remember I mentioned using CSS variables for customization. So we have the background color of these accordions is like a light gray. And when you hover, you get this like slightly darker gray effect. If I jump into the CSS quickly, so at the top, we define two CSS variables, and we define them in the root using ngdeep. And the reason we do this, as opposed to somewhere else, is because it keeps everything located in one place, so it's nice and easy to find, to see what CSS variables you are exposing. So we give them default values here, and then use them in our code. And so you can think of this as the public styling API for this component. So if we go now back to our black box page, smart component, if I uncomment these two, we are basically overriding the two variables with slightly different values. And that is going to give us a different color accordion. And so this is a really nice way, I find, of customizing the styling, because it's really tempting to do something like ngdeep app accordion item, and then start messing with the background color or whatever. The problem with doing this is you start to create strong coupling between your smart component and your dumb component. And as soon as the inner workings of that dumb component start changing, you could be introducing apps by breaking things due to the strong coupling. Whereas if you have a well-defined styling API via CSS variables, it's sort of like a contract that you then have to honor, and it's a more reliable way of offering a styling options to your developers. Okay, so the next thing, so quite often I find people don't quite know when to break up a component. And so I thought I'd just try to answer that question by giving quite a vague guide about when you can do, when you ought to break things up. So the first thing I'd say is, if it's difficult to figure out what's going on, if you find yourself having to think too hard about what's happening, then probably you have an opportunity to break up the component there. If it has several different concerns, so breaking a single responsibility principle, then yeah, maybe then you want to think about breaking it up. Not always, but maybe. If some of the functionality is going to be reused elsewhere, then that's a good opportunity to put things in a dumb component and make them reusable. If there's lots and lots of lines of code, then think about breaking things up. And if you find yourself copying and pasting HTML, CSS, or TypeScript, then almost certainly you should be using reusable components instead. But ultimately, it is subjective. So I try to get into the mindset of, if things start to get complicated, then it's a sign they need to be broken down into small, well-defined subproblems. And then the other thing is, if you're repeating yourself, probably make a component. So yeah, I've got a few links here. Tom, if you wouldn't mind posting oh, I forgot to mention, actually, I was going to ask Tom to post a link to the GitHub, the repo. All of this, the code I showed you.
You got into your code, and then I thought, oh, now would be a good time that everybody saw your repo. So
yeah,
I've done it behind your back.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, good man. Thanks for that. So yeah, so it's a bit late, but I should have said earlier, Tom has kindly posted my my repo link. So feel free to have a dig around. And I'll also post the link to this this tutorial, sorry, this PowerPoint online. And you can get access to these links. There's just a little bit more on sort of further reading about different approaches and for example, componentization on the back end. There's a cool tool here called Pattern Lab for building component libraries. So yeah, if you're interested in any of those things, I'll post the link to the presentation. And what I want to leave you guys on is a little bit of a tangent, but something else that's kind of related, because in a way, component-based design is a different approach to inheritance. I have come to try to myself avoid inheritance where I can. So my statement would be, you should, in general, avoid inheritance. I kind of think it's inflexible. difficult to reason about. You sort of end up coding yourself into a corner quite often. And often you can have an alternative approach by using shared services and component composition. So I wanted to know what everyone thought. I know that Tom, I'm going to stop sharing my screen now for a second. Where are we? Okay, cool. Yeah, Tom, I know that this topic has come up quite recently for you, hasn't it?
It has, but to be fair, I wasn't the first person to put my hand up. So I think we ought to have a run through of hands. So I see Dhaval has raised his hand. Is that all right?
Yeah, yes, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so one question, Max, like, and this is what I found. Maybe I was doing things definitely wrong. That's why I ran into that problem. So I had a page which was quite complex, okay? So not just 5 components, it has say 10, 11, or 20 components. Now, is there a way to separate out the logic? Because I can imagine if every logic or everything to deal with the inputs and outputs of that particular of those dumb components are in that massive component.ts of the smart component, things could get unmanageable in that sense as well, right? Because then you have the single file doing a lot of handling. I know it shouldn't be that, but I found that I was having a lot of logic in that single page of the smart component handling all the interactions. And these when I see a page, it was a page which had lots of links showing modal dialogues, and clicking on those dialogues did some NGRX stuff behind the scenes and showed another modal dialogue in response to it, whether it was successful. So it was not just simple. So it ended up being quite complex. I don't know the answer, but it seems like the smart component, it works well, maybe 80% of the time. But is there a way we can separate the behavior of those linked to those small components that we are doing, or is there any recommendation on that?
Yeah, so I would say, first of all, I think with any of these sort of approaches to programming in general, is it's not a hard and fast rule. Oftentimes you have to mix different approaches and just figure out what works best for you. Having said that, I think other things you can do, particularly on the TypeScript side, is using scoped services, for example. So shifting some of the business logic from the TypeScript into services. You can have multiple services. So maybe you have you break up the different behavior of a component into 3 or 4 different services to keep things organized. I know that Tom, I think you work with Tom, don't you, Dhaval? So you probably both use Component Store from the NGRX team. And that's another, I guess that's another way that you can sort of decouple the business logic from some of the more interface sort of interaction type logic in the component. And I mean, you can shift stuff into directives as well if it makes sense to have a bit of like click logic and that kind of thing in directives. Then put it in there. But yeah, other than that, I guess the only other thing is to have a bit more hierarchy and try to break up your smart component into sub-smart components. Really, I think we had a comment from someone who said they can add to Dhaval's question. Rovshen?
Yeah, sure. This is a problem that we often face. We have a huge web app for admin portal for one of the big companies in US. So what I found out after listening to Thomas from NGConf for one of the latest NGConfs, push-based architecture, right? What I kind of came to conclusion is any component should have as little logic as possible related to handling, processing, RxJS reactions, and all that stuff. And I mean, for me, smart components should be like 20 lines, very small, right? And everything else should be moved out, and services should be injected there to handle stuff, right?
I think the key is to have, as Max mentioned, right, to have smaller services which are declared at the component level to handle different pieces of logic, and that will, which I did do, to be honest,
exactly.
when I was going that. So
That's why I kind of lowered my hand, because Max answered it very well. But I just want to kind of add that it's a new way of thinking, right? Because when we think about service, we don't think about component level service. And I see that people trying to put API calls and business logic in a service that's globally injectable. But I think what Max said and you said, right, is a new way of thinking of kind of logic just for that component that's in the service, just for mapping and processing. And we are talking about smart components mainly here. And that pattern is amazing, actually.
Yeah.
And I think
Sorry.
I think also when you start to shift more complex processing onto the front end, it's there's no reason not to bring some of the more advanced concepts from the back end, from typically back end programming as well. So, you know, patterns like adapters or factories, that kind of thing. All of these things are designed to sort of break down simplicity and help you organize your code, essentially. So,
if I might add to that, Max, I think something that's tempting to do with inputs and outputs is to have an input and output for every little thing that you want to do, and maybe particularly with the output being an event emitter, you could actually treat that more as a bus, because that's kind of what Nrwl is doing. And I'm wondering if you can feed into your service from your smart component and sort of attach itself to that bus and deal with those events.
Tom, actually, I have played with that, and again, somebody else in Nrwl talked about it. Because reactive forms, in a sense, is state management tool, right? So reactive form is your mini Nrwl in your component. And we don't take enough advantage of that, because all the controllers, they have actually value changes, which is observable, which you can directly pass to your service at init somehow, and then get back observable stream, which will be working with that input stream. And that can trigger some nice push style one-way data flow, right? So.
Yeah, for sure. And we've run into this problem where when you try to sort of lean too heavily on inputs and outputs in components, particularly when you're nesting several layers deep, it can get a bit unmanageable. And particularly at that point, having scoped services and injecting those into, I suppose, sort of semi-smart components or very thin smart wrappers around dumb components works quite well, because then you can be very deeply nested, but then just, you know, hook into the service layer and then go with that one-way data flow. So you're sort of taking data in and dispatching events back by the service.
You've sparked Val's opinion here, so I was just going to butt in and say, Val, what do you think about that?
That is great. I just wanted to share a very good news with you guys. A couple of days ago, I reviewed a merge or a PR that just got merged into Angular. And with that, we could pass metadata to the interceptors, which means now a module that is third-party module publishes the interceptor as well. So a lot of logic that you need to deal with, it could be just before the data is put on the API at one place. So we don't have to go through all these modules and make sure that they process the data, the incoming data, the outgoing data. And it just made it in a couple of days ago. So I hope that it makes it to Angular soon, the next release. And that will reduce the complexity by a ton, because, you know, interceptors are great, but if you cannot pass data to it, it's really hard, like the state data of which state the requester was in. So good old days, that was possible. We kind of piggyback some data on the request itself, the headers, and then we peeled it off before it made it to the wire. But right now that is built in. So with that said, it's going to make life a little bit easier. One thing myself, Max, that I've come to appreciate dumb component or simple components, that they're not responsible for too much churn, is when you're building a massive form for healthcare company, because especially in the United States, there are just too many pieces of information that you have to process. And I've been in projects that 200 developers, they're continuously pushing data to it. And the decision at some point, somebody decided that every tiny form would go to the API and get what he wants. That was great because division of responsibility, but there was no way for us to figure out, okay, the form is ready. And then we could not get that button grayed out and then say, okay, now the form is fully populated. Now just make it enabled so people could talk to it, which meant we had to leave the button enabled, and the form was not complete yet because the data is still coming, but the users, they wanted to just click on something. And then that created a lot of havoc. So creating dumb components that they just meant to do one thing, do it well, provided somebody drives them, it is really important. And for forms or things like that, I highly encourage to have static methods that the dumb component for that tiny form knows how to manipulate its data, but let somebody else drive it. So,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
I think yeah, there's definitely a lot to be said for this pattern. Rovshan, you mentioned something in your message about combining services. I just wonder if would you mind just describing that briefly?
It's another great talk by Deborah Karata in ngconf, and she has great Pluralsight courses on this. And basically, there's lots of talk about how to combine observables, okay? And that's one of the main selling points of observables for me, because they're so composable, right? And they're so functional. And that's amazing. Even in backend in Java, everybody's hyped about this. But this is basically stream processing. So observable is like an array, right, that never ends. And you can get into it anytime, and you can start reading from it. So basically, to simplify, right, if you try to manage your services in a way that their methods return observables, or they compose observables, you can easily combine that. And even if they return promises, you can still combine them as observables, right? And there's different high-order maps in RxJS that can do that. And the different high-order maps will be used for different cases. We have a switch map, merge map, concat map. And what this can do, they can switch, they can change an observable. You get in one observable stream, so you read that value, and based on that, you can change it to a new observable stream and return that. So basically, you can combine in that switch, in that change, you can combine different observables right there. Or you can combine them at creation with from or some other creational operators, right? So it's actually, once you understand it, it's like, oh my God, it's so easy. But to understand it, you have to play with it. When I heard about it from Deborah Karata, I was like, how on the earth that's possible to combine observables? It sounds so different. But the way they flow is actually like water. If you think about pipes, that really helps. Like, it's like stream of data. Even if it's just one value that you control, like HTTP response, right? It's still, you have to think about as a stream of data that's continuous, right? Because it could be events from button clicks. It could be inputs that user types, right? It could be actually continuous stream that, because browser is natively event-driven. It's natively continuous different events.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of RxJS, I've got to say. I did a little talk about using the view model pattern, which allows you to make a lot of your components reactive. And yeah, RxJS everywhere as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I want to also point out about how to make it simpler with async pipe, right? I don't know if you haven't touched it, but that's another nice thing, right? So in your smart component, you can use async pipe, and then once data is resolved, you can pass it to dumb or presentational components, right? And that kind of simplifies the smart component a lot. So your smart component should never subscribe inside it, right? And of course, sometimes people do deeply subscriptions. They subscribe inside pipe. So understanding observables will help you a lot to simplify your container component code, smart component code.
Also, if you keep things immutable, so if every emission of your observable generates a new object, then the Angular change detection through the input decorator, through input properties, the change detection will trigger like a DOM update whenever it gets a new whole object. So it's quite a nice way to keep things performant as well.
Right. And another thing that you didn't mention, but I really love about Angular 2+ is on-push change detection. And that thing kind of saves you in lots of troubles, and it creates new troubles which you need to fix. But it prevents you from pushing the problems onto the user, who would have to wait for all the change detections to settle.
Wolfshen, in the chat, you're actually being asked for some content. Can you provide some links for what you're talking about? So how to combine.
I have some links that I put together.
I realize quite a few of us do it, but it's good to share. So seeing as you started this, let's have your links.
Yeah, so I'm on 2 computers. This is my home computer, and I have my work computer. So I can share it.
Cool.
Maybe in the comments in Angular Nation. How about that?
Well, that would be fine. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, but I started that journey for my team, and it was I had to teach also. I had presentation on it on push-based architecture, which involves smart presentation component discussion.
It's. I feel like you may have just volunteered as our next speaker, Roshan.
No, I don't know anything.
No pressure. It's fine.
I'm still learning.
Yeah, me too. That reminds me, I'm going to post the link to my deck as well. So in case anyone wants.
I see Val has got his hand up. I was going to get a word in, but he got there before me. Go for it, Val.
One question that I had regarding the CSS, Max, your preference would be the way that you showed us how you let 2 components use a DOM component and style it the way they want, or do you subscribe to the method that you just pass in a CSS name as an input as well, and let the DOM component take that CSS and apply it internally? So
So so for example, maybe a map, like a map, key value map of styles and values. Is that what you mean?
It would be like component A that is it prepends everything with A toolbar like this, and then component B has B dash toolbar like that, and then A and B both pull in the toolbar, pass their own class, and the toolbar just applies the class and knows that that class will leak, sip through, and becomes visible.
I see what you mean. Yeah, so you're so you would define a globally applied CSS class, and then you'd pass the name of that class in as an input, for example. That certainly works, and there's often times where you do unfortunately need more control to be able to customize the insides of a component. So for example, if you guys have used material, for example, customizing that is possible, but it gets very messy. And if you've customized material, when you upgrade from one version to another, you have to check everything, make sure the customizations you've made haven't been broken. And the reason for that is because you're not relying on what is in effect a public API. And that's the cool thing about going the CSS variable route, is because the developers of the component get to define very clearly and publicly what you're allowed to mess around with. And so you know that that's not going to break when when the code changes. But of course, there are times when you will need to just dive in and modify stuff. So if you can get away with going the CSS variable route, I would definitely encourage that. So if it's an internal library, for example, then I think that's better, because it will make your code more bug resistant. But there will for sure be times when you have to go the more hands-on route, and by maybe passing classes in, or writing your own CSS, that kind of thing. That's what I would say.
All right, thank you.
Cool. Max, do you mind if I respond to your original question? you could pop.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, because I would really like to hear a kind of vote, if you like. I'd like to know an opinion. Okay, because Max, yeah, if you don't mind putting your slide on there, that'd be lovely. Thank you.
Cool.
This advice: you should avoid inheritance. Personally, I'm not sure I agree, and I'm not going to just leave it there. I think what I'll just say is that I think there are times that suit me when I think I do want to use inheritance, because I think it reduces code. It's more dry. But I think if it's used in a lot of places, and particularly if you inherit more than once, you will run into problems. It can lead to complexity to do with maintenance. So I'm just going to pause there for a second and just say, everybody here, how about we show a raise of hand if you quite like inheritance? Okay.
I'm going to just stop sharing, so then we can see more hands.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good idea.
So the question was, if you quite like inheritance, then raise your hand.
Oh, we've got a few. Okay.
I would say I quite like it though. I mean, I just I'm the same. I think it's got its place, but I
can share a folk story about this. Why inheritance might be good.
That'd be
cool. I'm just proposing that under simple circumstances, it can be a good thing, but under complex ones, it's a maintenance nightmare. So yeah, particularly depending on the caliber of developer that you've got working on the project. So we've still got a couple of hands up, but maybe they want to say something. But
are we within TypeScript inheritance or other languages?
Yeah, I'm talking about within Angular actually. Okay. I'm saying, is inheritance good for you in Angular? Because when you're in a project, in a large project, it can lead to complexity, particularly because it hides behaviors behind another class, and it can be hard to debug or hard to think about without having that class up, maybe on another screen. So you need to see more code. But I would argue maybe I should share a screen to justify what I'm saying here. So I'm going to have a go. Here we go. I'm going to pick up this one. Here we are. Share. Okay. Hopefully you can see I've cloned Max's repo, and I've picked his before and after, smart versus dumb before and smart versus
that's a really good example.
And I was suggesting that to reduce code, to be dry, just doing this, and I'll just open up the spread this a little bit. There we go. The point that I'm trying to make is, when you're inheriting, if you're not going to actually override anything and not add any extra behaviors, then it's easy to think about, because all you've done is that. Okay. But if you're going to override and add extra behaviors, then your developers are going to have to be on their toes about what code has changed. Does that make sense? Yeah, that's just my opinion for now.
It also depends. It also depends, like, what you're reusing, right? What are you extending, right? I mean, if you look at material GitHub, and if you look at Stepper, which is component I talked about earlier, it actually extends base directive, and it uses TypeScript inheritance in advantage for Angular, right? Because you also inherit properties, which gives you access to queries. So it's kind of reusing some of the code that you would have to write in two different components potentially, using directive extension.
Tom, could you ask also who doesn't like inheritance?
Do you know? That's exactly, yes. Yeah, I'd really like some hands up now. Could you put your hands down, Val, as well? Anybody who really doesn't like inheritance because of the kind of the flip side of it? Is there anybody who opposes it?
I'm going to leave my hand down for both.
Hey, I have another question. Who doesn't like too many abstractions, right? Now, Tom, you're on mute.
Sorry. Aris, would you mind if I called you out and asked you to speak about why you oppose it? Because I really want to learn from you.
Yeah, sure. Hi, all. It doesn't look to me as the proper way to write an Angular application. I mean, inheritance is there in TypeScript, but in reality, there's no inheritance, right? There's JavaScript and there is prototype classes. So inheritance is like we say something with another name. I don't know how to express that. It's like it hides something from the developer. Also, another thing that bothers me with inheritance is when I have a project, I want to be consistent. So either I will use inheritance or not. So if I have some components that use inheritance and some don't, then if you're in a big team with a lot of developers, maybe this will be confusing for them because they don't know what should I use here. Should I use inheritance or not? One thing that may change my mind, however, is that when you apply inheritance in the components, you do not need to test so many things because you test just the basic component and everything else will work, except if you want to test the template also. So generally, I avoid inheritance.
I think also just a small thing as well is the example you showed, Tom, is I agree. There's very little to go wrong there, but you have to make sure it's very tempting and very easy for a developer who may be someone who's a bit more junior to sort of break the rule that you have set of not overriding methods, for example, and then that's slipping into the code base. So yeah, if it was like, if it was a handful of really good devs who were very much on the same page, then I think that would work great. But it assumes that you have a bit of control and consistency across the team as well.
So Tom, my hand was up because of the CSS question. I forgot to bring it down. I just do not like inheritance in TypeScript. It's a half-baked idea. In Python, I can't live without inheritance because it's done properly. But as an example, if you have the base class that injects something and sets it to private, now the drive class likes to make this public. It's impossible. Now, I've seen it in many codes that the drive class has to import that thing twice under a different name because it just has a needs to make that service public to whoever that is using it. And you can't overwrite that. And just that shows me that it's not fully baked.
Okay, I agree with you. So can I ask a question? I pose a question, and I think because of the way that you're thinking, Val, and particularly Aris as well, and yeah, I think some others are thinking along these lines as well. In that situation that I showed you where I was picking up a container component, in the container presenter pattern, and I was inheriting from it in order to get the same behaviors about its state management, its response and provision of values to the inputs and outputs of UI components, presentation components. As a way of remaining dry, okay, should I either be looking at making services public so that they're exposed to the template, so that therefore I can inherit from one container component, recreate the new template on my, got that wrong, I'll step back. I can, instead of inheriting, I create a new container component that has a new template. So it's composing the similar UI components. But to avoid duplicating the component code, why not just expose the service as public? Okay, so that I can just have that on my inputs and outputs, and not have this, official, what's the word, controller layer. What are your thoughts on that?
Who you're addressing this question to?
I'm well, seeing as you're asking, I'll try you, Val.
Sure. For me, we always talk about dumb component and smart component, right? I always wish that somebody comes and says simple component. The logic that is really responsible for the core business and has no business to do anything with rendering should be tucked aside and make that component very simple. If you put whatever that is the core business into a service, and then it's really easy to write awesome unit tests against it, and then let the component decide. The component has the visibility to everything of the service, and then let the component decide what needs to be public, what needs to be private, and how, whether we need getter and setter on top of that to make sure that the observables, that they're not shared naked such that anybody could do a .next on them. So all of these makes a simple component. So dumb and smart, that's something that everybody focuses on. But you have to keep your component simple. Simple means services, they're unit testables, tucked aside, you mix and match and inject what you want. That is my approach. And we have Nx that now enables us to spread our logic all over the libraries and just bring in what we need.
Cool, thank you. I'm wondering if I could just, because he explained it so well, whether I could ask Aris on this subject, what he feels about making services publicly exposed to the template.
Yeah, you see, I'm a fan of public services, especially for properties, for small properties. For example, if you have a user object, a global user object in a service, and you need the name of the user, it was easy for me to just inject the service as a public in my component and then bind it on the template. But I did the same question some days ago in the Slack channel of the Angular GDEs, and they gave me some really cool insights about the subject. Particularly, they told me that it is not preferable to refer to a service in the template as a public, because you then break the principle of least knowledge pattern, which if you go to the Wikipedia and search about that, because I didn't know this pattern, says that a single unit, it is a software pattern, okay, a software design pattern, and it says that a single unit should not know about other strangers except its closest friends. So I translated to a component should not know about other services except its own. For example, not other services, I mean, a component should be responsible only for the presentational logic and not for using services directly. They should create their own, sorry, yeah.
So I was just going to say, do you think that still applies when the service is sort of scoped particularly to that component? Like, I can understand, I totally get that if it's a global service, but if it's specific for that component, maybe it's not so important.
Yeah, I agree. If you add it to the provider's array of your component and it is scoped to that component, I think you're fine. I would do the same. You know, it is easy to just inject a public service and use it.
Yeah,
I like that. That's so we've got a general rule and we've got a means to break it, and I think that's a good answer. But Rovshen, you wanted to add something?
I just want to say that I'm not a big fan of sharing stuff through services because they're not designed to be sharing constants. I like to use a constant file or utility like static file or something like that. In Java, we do that a lot. And in general, in backend, right, there's different groups of code and how you share it. And service is normally supposed to be status, ideally, that shares some functionality, some kind of processing, right? And there are two types of services. Static services that just process data, and services that inject something that call some other services. But regardless, injecting service in a template, I don't think there's actually need for that, right? Because if you're following push-based architecture and you're just using a business service to get observable, all you need that observable, right? So in your template, you'll have 1-2 bindings with a sync pipe to get data, and that's it. You should not ask service anything else theoretically. In ideal world, right?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right on the push-based side. I suppose what we're worrying about here is the outputs. You know, how to handle the specific cases for what things you need to do next when an input, sorry, a UI component has responded with something.
Yeah, and that goes back to the form controls, right? Which provide you that mechanism to pass observables back to service. Or you could call method of the service in a component. Yeah, some people call it directly on template. You can call it in component. And that will allow better testability, in my opinion, because I'd rather not have testing logic through HTML. It's not performant also.
You're right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Would a change in the method definition be detected by the Angular compiler if you put such in the template? Like if there was a service with a method one, if I call that.
It's all about how you test it, right? So if you test it in the template, you need to actually.
I agree that I'm just saying that the downside of putting it in the template also is that if that service definition changes in terms of the method name, for example.
Right. Yeah, that's.
I guess Angular compiler would pick it up, but I'm not sure. I haven't tried it, but it might.
It should.
It depends how you build your app.
Yeah.
If you do ahead of time compilation, that should pick up the change in the signature. If you have TypeScript or not, which you should.
I see Val has got another thing to say. Hi.
Well, one of the main reason why everybody sets everything to public, it has nothing to do whether it's private or public. 99%, maybe 90% of the reason is in their unit test file, the spec file, they cannot use component dot. Now they have to use the angle brackets, and it's too much pain. The least path of resistance is just make it public so I could see it there. And that has been the cause. If Ivy, I was hoping that Ivy was smart enough, and then we could push the TypeScript guys that we say, okay, the spec.whatever file with the template.html file and the component.whatever file, these, we could group them together to be all one entity. So if I set it to private, it's visible among all those three files. If that is the case, 99% of the things will be private and brings the security to everything. But everything is public because the spec file is going to be really ugly if you have, if you remove the choice of using component dot, do this, component dot, do that. That's why everybody goes, oh, let me just set it to public. Don't have time. I have deliverables. Let me just do it.
If the test runner extended the component under test, I reckon they could get at it. But anyway, that's another subject.
And I would add to Wal's concern, right? I have to sometimes declare something public just to access it in template. And I don't like that because it forces you to give a contract, an interface to extenders, not extenders, but to consumers who can grab that component and access these public properties, which I don't mean to. I just wanted to give it to template only, right? So there should be another mechanism to say template only access or something. And yeah,
I agree, because as far as I'm concerned, the template is part of this. It's intrinsically part of the component.
Yeah,
so I don't see why it has to be public.
Yeah.
And I was hopeful with IV, but it didn't happen.
Yeah.
Cool. I think you were popular there, Max. You know, this conversation has outlived the length of your presentation. That was a really good one.
I just know how to pick a contentious subject, I guess. Yeah, that was a really good discussion. We also have 2 more talks, but these ones are a fair bit shorter, so hopefully I've left you guys enough time. Tom is up next to talk about configuration in NX projects. So if you're feeling a bit better, I know you're ill, Tom. You sound a lot better.
That actually made me wonder if I was, but yeah, what I was thinking is, because we've been talking for more than an hour, I think you guys deserve a drink or something. If you don't want a drink, you can raise a hand now to say we'll continue. I've got one voter. Stephen, you want to continue? You can stay if you want. You can stay. Oh, Glenn can stay as well. I think that's a few enough answer to probably say that we deserve a quick 5-minute break. Okay, so yeah, shall we regroup at, say, just about 21 minutes past 7? Okay, all right.
Sounds good.
Yeah, feel free to, put your hand over your screen or actually turn it off, and then we'll see you in 5 minutes. Okay, cheers.
Cheers, Tom.
By the way, Tom, I tried it out. The template doesn't pick up the build errors.
Hi, Dav.
I tried it out, changing referencing a service method from a template with a completely random name.
At the minute, if you were responding.
Am I? Oh crap! 1 second.
Oh, have you lost your sound? It's... Right, a few people coming back. I'm just getting prepared. Right. Okay, we've got a few people back, so I think I'm good to go on. That's wonderful. Great. Well, funny, I suddenly realized that my sound's in my headphones and I hadn't been listening. But anyway, okay. Right, good. Okay, welcome back. Hope you're feeling refreshed. I'll get started. I'm going to share a screen. Okie dokie. So I'm just sharing a piece of text at the minute. Hopefully you can see my screen. Can you? A little nod.
Yep, can see that.
Great. Okay, good. Okay, so really what I'm here to do is actually introduce a discussion. I will sort of put a recipe up for something that I've done, but it's really not so much about what I've done. It's to hear about what you think should be done. Okay. So last time in our last meetup, the second half, I ended up talking about something using for root with an async config. The idea being that as well as the environment.ts file, we also sometimes need an external config file that might either come from an API or from a JSON file that resides near or linked to the bundle that's deployed as part of the application and can change outside of build time. So hence it's an async config. So I'll mention that briefly when I get to it. But what I like to do is actually show you how I've moved my environment.ts. But what I should say is that last time I actually felt against it. I felt that it should stay in your app and maybe shouldn't move at all. But then I did, well, you know, let's try it because it's not that difficult, is it? And it turns out that it's actually really easy. It's so simple, in fact, that maybe we should be moving it when we're in a situation like where we've got a lot of libraries, particularly if we're using something called Enterprise Angular Monorepo Patterns. I'm going to try and bring up the meet again. Yeah, do any of you guys use Enterprise Angular Monorepo Patterns at all? I know some of my colleagues do. Thanks, Dav. Oh, good. There's one. Does anybody else, has anybody tried them or used an alternative, which there's several alternatives out there that use a sort of domain-based, oh, thanks, Quakes. Yeah, the sort of domain-based idea of modular separation of code into libs. So anyway, point being, I'm going to dump a repo into the chat, and you can follow along if you like. Okay, and meanwhile, I'm going to open up the same repo that I've just sent you a link to, And you can see a README there because I've given lots of details about what I've been up to. Okay, but I'm just going to introduce you very briefly to the main piece of what I've done, which is to create a library in the domain of the application that I'm working with, which is just called injectors demo. I've called it util environment. The prefix is an Enterprise Angular Monorepo Patterns prefix, so it's a util lib. Within there, all I've done is copy or move the environments folder that was previously in the app source file and dumped it in there. And then at the same time, I've edited the Angular JSON file. If I scroll down, this is basically all I've done. And if I do that, there we go, then we can see it. So it's pretty simple, really. It's just, it does the file replacement for the production build, but instead of doing it locally, it does it in a lib. And now that's accessible to my domain. Thoughts? Has anybody got an opinion on that one?
I think we should do that because it's more flexible than it will allow us to import environments and libraries, like maybe domain-specific libraries, more specific, right? Rather than anything else.
Yes. The constraint, obviously, I think we just touched on that there, is that that it is specific to the domain that you're in, so shared cannot access it, and any other sort of domain folders that might reside in your monorepo cannot access it. But that's kind of normal because your domain is your app. Okay, so it's kind of expected that your environment shouldn't be outside that area. However, there are times when it might need to be, and you'll see in the README that I've got here, I've also mentioned the two times that you might want to do it, which is when you're doing it in a public library, like a thing that you're going to publish and it's going to be standalone. You might do it the same way as I've talked about previously, using the for root in the library. But another way that you might use it in a cross-domain type of way, when you're talking about Enterprise Angular Monorepo Patterns, is to use a data access lib and then just set up the data as an NGRX slice instead. So you can pass the config directly into the data access lib. And I might actually just briefly show you that in my case, my state folder, the actions, I've got one action, okay? And that just sets the config. That's it, end of story. That's my thoughts. Now, I know that other people have got opinions about this. And if I may, I'm actually going to start with Val. If you're still there. Val, I'm here. Yeah, I know that you've got a beautiful NPM library. And I'm wondering if you fancy sort of sharing a screen and actually showing us your NPM lib page. Would you be up for that? Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Alrighty, you guys see my screen, right?
Yes.
All right, let me just increase the size so everybody could see it.
It's for some reason it's not the main screen on the page. I've still got a grid of 9 tiles, 8 of which are faces.
Yeah, that's true.
You guys don't see my screen, my GitHub?
We can, but it's very small. I might hold on. There's a way to change the layout, isn't there, Tom?
There is. I think
you can pin it down. Click on my image. And
yeah. You can actually just double click it and it'll stay. So
it's just gone full screen for me.
Oh, sorry. There is a pin button when you hover.
Okay, that's it. There we go.
Hover on my screen and pin it down, so that will be the focus.
It's certainly good enough. Thank you.
All right. So I increased the size such that everybody could see what's going on. I do have ngx config And so what I do, my background is that I do consulting for a lot of big companies in the US. And prior art is really important because I can't reinvent myself. And I don't want to go to every place that I go and I have to write a new config file from scratch just to be different from somebody else because somebody pays for it. So to create the prior art, any libraries that I've got, I publish it open source. Wherever I go, I just bring it in. And nobody has claim over it. And just that reduces the time to market for me because I hit the ground and I have my app up and running. All I have to do is just spice it up. This one is using NX. And if you see the library, this is very
Val, could you zoom out a little bit? Because yeah, I can't see the left-hand side. I apologize for that.
Zoom out as in, that would be?
That's good. Is that good for everybody? I'll take it as yes.
It's just about okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I go to the lib here, and I noticed that somebody was saying that, hey, you know, I just share my constants in a constant file. Here you go. The barrel will decide what to share outside the library itself. Everything is coded here, and everything revolves around this tiny service. So the way that I've configured the service is just not one thing. It doesn't care about just the environment only. What if you need to make a server call to figure out which flavor of this voting app in which state to morph into before even Angular is bootstrapped? So for that, it enables remote configuration fetch as well. Knows how to deal with get, knows how to deal with post, how long to wait, how many times retry, and do all the things. And as far as RxJS goes, that I really like, the only time ever in my application you see a promise is on line 69. Because deliberately, I pause there till my remote configuration is there. It could have been async await, but this is a very old app. So that's the only time that I have to wait and retry till the remote configuration arrives, and then let Angular proceed to bootstrap. And then I make the option available to everybody there. And so it is really, really simple. Tom, the other week, talked about how to inject the config and create the token and do all of that. So we do have that. All we need here is the HTTP client. And let me just see if I could. So this HTTP client you see there, that is the only thing we depend on. And that is part of Angular, which means 0 external dependencies. The other thing that we need is the token, because we have to inject the token into this. The beauty of injecting token here and once for all is anybody that comes from the outside could just inject this service in. They get the configuration file, and they should get a read-only configuration file. What they need to do, they need to just grab their portion, whatever they care about, bring it in, set a default if nothing is being set, and move on with life. Now, one thing that I wanted to show you guys is, let me just go back one level. This, hold on, here we go. This is very simple as it gets. But one difference between what I have here and what Tom the other week was talking about is that I have taken the onus of knowing about what that is in this configuration module. So the user doesn't have to go and figure out what is the app initializer. Now I got to read on it and figure out how to do it. What is the unit test for it and stuff. Here we have the factory, we have the config, but we on line 40 indicate that Angular should not start till we get our data, whether it comes from environment.ts or it comes from the remote server. Once that is done, the configuration is available to monorepo style in NX, to anything there, but it's available to anything that is being pushed to NPM as well, as long as they know how to inject this in. So this is the library, that very tiny library. And of course, we do need an app to do the integration test as well. And this is how we use such a service. All we have to do, just include it in, and that is in npm.js.org, and then inject it. Whether you want to inject it private and public, it's totally up to you. And at that point, we're set. Here we say, hey, you know, the title comes from the environment. And let's go quickly look at the environment file to see if there is any title there. So could be prod, could be whatever. There is a production version app name. And we took the app name. We said the app name is the title. And this is very, very elaborate when it comes to the README. Let me clean my screen one more time. I've tried to explain everything so simply, such that the usage of this, it would be just 2 seconds for somebody to grasp of what's going on. First of all, as you see, I've given a type even to my environment object because it is app specific. And then there's some basic stuff and some stuff that they really needed. Here you go. We get the config file and do a for root on it, pass the environment into it. After that, we could use it, as we mentioned, anywhere that you want. We do have advanced use cases where, as I mentioned, if you have a remote config, you could set up the endpoint, which method you're going to have to call, how many seconds do you wait before you give up and bootstrap anyways, what header do you have to pass, and what is the body? Because you need all these combination and permutation if somebody has a remote config file. These are for advanced use cases. And when somebody gets the copy of the option, they could do a merge on it and copy it over and modify it, make their own copy of the configuration that they care about. And at that time, read-only was not available in TypeScript, so I couldn't make the type read-only, so I don't have to worry about mutation. This is a long time ago. But if I go and rewrite it, I would make sure that option, nobody could overwrite it. It would be a read-only for everybody. And it is MIT, so anybody could do whatever they want with it. It's, let's see how many percentage is the unit test. 95 is not bad. I'll take 95 on an external library, then 50 on an internal library anytime. And so this is available to whoever that wants this. I want to show you one last thing, if I may. I do have this overlay that I have to turn off. And that would not be in here. I'm going to take you somewhere where we could see the usage of that library. I do have a logger here that logs everything. Without a proper logger, debugging is going to be a nightmare. And here we have the log level, because the logger needs to have log level, but it's optional. Other apps, other libraries, they don't care about it. And this is how deterministic I want my app to be. I want to know exactly what comes first, in which order. As you see, config has to come before the log server because the log server needs the configuration. Therefore, we cannot do the logging through the log server before it's up. And then our log server is up, and then GraphQL is up, and then translation, UI kicks in, and then JWT token is set, authentication is done, user is logged in, user profile is fetched, web is fully ready, layout initiates. When you have something like that, because of some simple thing that prepares everything for the guy or the module that comes right after it, then that is really easy to debug. It's really easy to debug. You turn it on, you look at it, and you say, oh, I know exactly what's going on. One is going before the other one, especially in large projects. Their TypeScript finds the first reference to something in a wrong module and directly and just pulls it in. And the user doesn't look, oh, I should not reference that. I should reference the other one here. But here, you look at the debug, immediately you know what's going on. I did ask, if you go to Angular, you'd notice that I asked for something like this. Import config from Angular something. Why can I have that? Everything is written around this environment file. Why can I ask Angular for an import? Because they have the CLI, they have the software. Just let me import it. If they do that, if they enable import directly from Angular, it's going to make external library creation so simple, because anybody could get a hang of that environment file right away. So that was that tiny demo. And I do have an app that I want to show you in 2 seconds. If I go here.
Sorry, Val, I'm just very aware that we've got another talk still.
Probably another 1 minute to finalize.
Go for it. Yeah, I'm sure would be great to see what it is. Sorry to butt in. I just yeah.
Yeah. So let me just go here and say, yeah, proceed. So this is the app that it's using. This is a dummy app, and 100% is using everything that he was there. It just for now is converting currencies and does whatever that he needs to do. That debug level that you saw is for debug. This is not debug, this is production. So you don't see any of those logs leaking out. But this application is 100% using whatever that it was there. This way, you just create a bunch of tiny modules, glue them together. So when you go to your next client, all you have to do is, I want to glue a bunch of things together, make it the way you like it, and see you later. Not reinvent the wheel from scratch. Thank you.
Absolutely. Val, that was really nice. I think that the whole idea of having NPM libs so that you have prior art is very sensible. It's a good plan. I'm going to take a note from your activity.
Thank you. And it's a way to give back to the community as well, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And it would be nice if you share that GitHub on the chat.
Absolutely. Tom, if you could do that later on for me.
Certainly, I will do that. And indeed, Rovshen, you sent me a link on Angular Nation, and I'm going to post that as soon as I'm off. Okay, so I'll get both of those on there. Just a quick mention before we move on. Has anybody else sort of done, tried moving the environment.ts file to a more useful place?
I recommended you to Tom, and you said, no, leave it there right now. We don't need overcomplication.
Well, yeah, that is what I said. And I've chosen to eat my words. Okay, because I now feel that it should either be moved out or that we should shift it into a service or some kind of form of state, such as the way Val does it.
Yeah.
So we have to find a way of passing this stuff out.
So Thomas, we have some kind of way, but it's not very simple. It involves backend, so it's kind of complicated. It's not as easy as you guys have parsed out. Yeah.
I think you could call that async config. Yeah, pretty much. Probably. And yeah, as Val mentioned, his npm lib deals with that, and the one I was talking about last meetup as well, that deals with that as well. It's yeah, I think async configs are pretty common these days. I think stakeholders tend to want to be able to configure their app after it's been built. So that's one of those things. Okay, well, I'm going to shift on then, because I think, you know, there are not so many shouts on that, so it's worth talking about our next topic, because if you use libraries next to your app, if you're either using the CLI or using NX, you know, learning how to use the schematics correctly can save you a bunch of time, and hopefully Dhaval is going to tell us about it. Okay, cheers.
Indeed, I'll share my screen. Do you guys see my VS Code right now?
Very nicely. Maybe just for people on very small screens, could you zoom in one touch more?
One more. Okay.
Oh, was this the rehearsed size? I think it was. Let's keep it at that.
Yeah. I'm
This
okay. I don't
perfect.
have any problem.
Good. Okay. Cool.
Okay. So this it's not something I have done. I'm just replaying what's in documentation, but it's easy to miss out because we normally get quite overwhelmed. At least I get quite overwhelmed with the amount of stuff is there on the NX website and what schematics they give you, and you kind of, maybe you might have known about it, then it's good. But if you're not, then it's important. Tom pointed me out the other day that there is something like this. So it has been quite helpful. So the bit which I wanted to show, this is our NX repository. Okay, we have these feature libraries. There is this UI library, and there are a few utils here. Now, as we know, like if we have set up NX correctly, we have all the rules set up here, right? What can depend on what, and you also go along with it a set of tags that go along with your library, correct? So it often becomes a bit of pain that you want to, when you decide you want to move a library to a different name, for example. So if I say I have this library called UI, and if I want to move it to a different name called UI-mode, for example, and normally to do that, there are quite a lot of steps you have to go. You might want to either copy paste it, rename the folders, then you have to remember to change your tsconfig base to point to the right path. Then you have to go and update your tags in NXJSON. And most importantly, you have to mess with AngularJSON, which becomes a beast as you get more and more stuff added and more libraries created. So NX, right, has a good schematic for doing this, and this is what I'm going to show you. And it's something quite helpful to do such a refactoring. And if you haven't used it, this is a good one. So, and this is the Moocs schematic that you can use, and it's quite simple to use. So you say the folder to move your project into. So I have this one here, right? So I can copy this, and I say I want to move it to sales UI move, for example, right? And the project name, the original project name was sales UI, right? Which was based on the folder structure it automatically creates, right? And you can do the import path as node UI. And the good part is it also updates the imports of the projects that use this behind the scenes. So if I now run this bit, okay, and you see the changes that has happened. It has done all the laborious work for you, right? So at the same time, it has also it has moved here. So if you see, like it has, it's hard to see in the zoomed version, but it has updated AngularJSON to say, you know, it has deleted the old one and created a new project for you. It has also updated the tags here to.
Dhaval, you can just hide the left menu. Just hide left menu.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, so you can see it has renamed the project here, and it has moved the tags across, which is also quite reduces the amount of errors you get. And this is also, it has moved the name of the library, which was previously there, to this new one. So it has replaced it. And the best part is it was the ESLint, not ESLint. I think the main part I always get worried about is to deal with Angular JSON and NX JSON. So it has handled that for me, so I don't have to worry about it. So like say it has moved the tags across what was there before, and it has also, as you see, it has updated the imports of where it was used. So I was using not this one. I think it was one of these modules. So it has renamed the import, right? And it also rename these bits. Yeah, correct. So that is something quite helpful, I would say, in scenarios where you are doing some big refactoring and you want to get stuff done quickly. So that's the main schematic. I know it's not my creation, but it's something easy to get overlooked if you are already using NX for the first time or just started using it. This is something to quite easy, not much to, not many options, but it's quite helpful to keep things easy. And so if I just check all of these in, and I'll just tell you one more schematic, and that would be it. So mode UI lib, okay. And one last schematic is the one that is called remove. So if I want to delete a library because I don't want to use it anymore, right? So if I want to remove this library, so feature remove, right? I could just name it sales feature remove, okay? I don't know exactly what it does, but I normally click this true. You can look into the documentation. But if you see, it has made sure that the right bits are updated apart from deleting the folder. These are the 3 fields. So it's just another automation, reducing the chances of error. So, and I guess that's it. That's it. That is all from me. These were the 2 tiny schematics, which I think it's quite useful when you're refactoring stuff. So yeah, that's it. I'll stop presenting now.
Dhaval, do you know if those will be if they'll work if you're not using the
Nah,
official...
I tried it. Yeah, I tried it, Max. So I tried to create a CLI project, and it doesn't work.
What was the question?
What's that, Quakes? Sorry.
What was the question?
I was actually asking if you know if it will work if you're not using the official NX. I can't remember what they call it. Monorepo patterns, Enterprise Monorepo Patterns.
Yeah,
was it?
it's because Angular CLI obviously these days supports multiple apps and multiple libs. So it is a sort of semi monorepo workspace in it of its own. But no, the fact is that as Dhaval's just tested, yeah, it's only available if you use an NX workspace.
I'll show you actually, 1 second. Yeah,
it's actually not entirely correct because schematics is Angular CLI specific, right? And Nrwl is actually using schematics from Angular.
I understand. I'm not saying that what I'm trying to show you is this, right? I created a CLI app here, right? For example, yeah.
So basically, you can roll your own or use external library to do something similar. But Nrwl's one knows more about your app. That's why it can do more for you.
The problem is the problem is it doesn't tell me even to the option. So I just before the meetup, right? I tried to see. It doesn't even show me Nrwl schematics, right, in the console. So I don't think, because you need to probably it might show if I install a Nrwl schematics.
This NX console is specific to Nrwl. I mean, it's Nrwl's way to allow you to access any schematic, right? Not just Nrwl schematic.
Correct.
But you can access schematics from CLI without NX console. So
no. What I think the question was, can we use that scheme remove schematic in a CLI project? Correct, Max?
It was actually so. Am I right, Tom? Am I right in thinking that there are different ways to structure your monorepo, and one of them is the official pattern from the Nrwl team?
That's right. Yeah.
So my question was, if you don't follow that pattern, can you still use these schematics?
Yes.
Oh
you
yeah,
can.
yeah.
It's any
yeah.
It's any NX lib in an NX workspace. You can move it, rename it, or delete it using these two schematics.
Yeah, cool.
Mind you that this is at module level only, and if you want to just move one file, I encourage you guys to use get move. Otherwise, you're going to lose the history on that file that you're moving standalone.
Yeah.
I agree. I think this does get move as well. So when we moved across, it did a get move also behind the scene. So
yeah, at module level,
on.
it does it for you because it has enough information in all those JSON files. But if like, oh, that file should come in as well.
Agree. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So I just want to point out that schematics is not Nrwl specific. So it's actually provided from Angular itself. So
Yeah.
Nrwl makes it much easier to add and use one.
But that was that's it. That was my simple demo.
Looks really good. You're right. It's so easy to forget all these tools that you have available to you, and you end up doing things by hand, and you forget things. And...
I see from the chat that Matteo has been mentioning that he didn't find good support for NX for publishable libs. I can vouch for NX now because its latest version, and indeed the version before that, has fantastic support for publishable libs now. It was a bit wobbly, but yeah, NX has got really good at that kind of thing now. Yeah, I lean on that all of the time. So, I mean, yeah, my general feeling is I tend to use NX everywhere because it gives me extra tooling. That's why I like it. I think Dhaval has just justified it further.
So the schematic is, sure, Angular, they brought it in, but right now you could have NX for React, will use this schematic, will use their CLI, and is not going to know anything about Angular.
Yep.
I see Aris has his hand up. Can I take that from you?
Yeah, I would like to ask Dhaval a question. Thanks very much for your talk. How can I get the Nrwl schematics? I have already installed NX console, but I can't see them in my list. Do I need to generate a workspace first?
No, I think we can still, because as long as we install the schematic library, right, that should be enough for us to use. And to be honest, I should have tried to install the schematics separately and then run the command, the console, to see if it shows up, you know, in their lookup, because I didn't do that, and that probably is something I didn't try. But I think it's, if I show you an NX11 repo, I think that they have a package to reflect that.
Yeah, I've just posted a link in about migrating to NX. So it's possible to install NX features on your Angular CLI app without actually altering the structure at all. It just throws in a bunch of config files into it. But that means that you get all of the default schematics that you could benefit from this tooling.
If I download NX and if I install NX library and create a workspace, an NX monorepo workspace, when I open it in Visual Studio Code, will it recognize it that it is NX and will show me the schematics, the Nrwl schematics maybe?
I think it uses this probably. I don't know, Tom, go ahead. Yeah,
it'll pick them all up. Basically, every single schematic that you've installed that's compatible with the Angular CLI, so it's an Angular schematic, will be listed in the Angular console. And what's more, some of the NX ones will allow you to add automatically. So say, for instance, there's an add NGRX schematic, and it will just bung all of the schematics in there for you by running one schematic, if you like. So yeah, it grows as you install more stuff.
Cool. Thanks a lot.
If you could use it, please go ahead and use it. NX is just frees you to focus on your core product, not worry about the environment ever again.
There's some challenges. So like when I used NX, we had issues with running Cypress tests because it wraps Cypress. So there's difficulty passing stuff to
for sure.
execution.
It's a growing community, right? We raise PRs or whatever. They go and fix the issues. They fix it, and then we just move forward.
Yeah, they're supportive to extent, but there's limitations of versioning, right? So staying on top of the versions is usually the best.
Yep.
If you can.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Cool. Have we got any more questions on this subject? Oh, Matteo, you're talking about ng deploy in the chat. Did you want to voice anything whilst we're talking here?
No, I have a pending study about the Angular builders and deploys, because 2 years ago it was problematic to think about a monorepo and publishing libraries. We had ng packager, root directory of tsconfig was limited to only the libraries, so it could not import from external libraries or sibling libraries. And now I see that NX takes their approach of the build NX, NX cache to perform the builds and etc. But I'm still thinking, because with Lerna, I was able to fetch the already compiled packages from NPM, and I do not need the cache already. But yeah, I'm still thinking about how to refactor my company 10 websites plus 30 libraries, and yeah, it's still thinking.
It is tricky to migrate towards that. Quite a while ago, we did a presentation relating to how to migrate to NX and using Enterprise Angular Monorepo Patterns on our meetup. If you go to our website, you'll be able to chase it down there. But we've got a YouTube channel as well, so you'll be able to see that meetup to do with what it was to do with sharing code, wasn't it, Max? So we were discussing how to share code, and ultimately it was just a sell for NX. But yeah, it's looking at alternatives as to how you can go about it, and the fact that you can migrate from a partially published suite of files over to a monorepo full blown. But there is a path towards it. I'm just going to paste the URL to our website, which it just has links. You'll be able to find that. It's the sharing code one, the meetup, which is in 2020 in March. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Cool, thanks. Okay, I think we've actually come to about time here today, because we've been having a really good chat, and I don't want to drag on when people are getting tired, because I know you're in different time zones. But does anybody have anything burning that they need to say before we call it a day?
I have one quick question. So I know we've got loads of people from different countries, pretty much all over the world. And I was just thinking, we do a lot of our sort of marketing, well, rather Tom does all the marketing on Angular Nation and meetup.com. Are there any other websites that you guys use or recommend that we could be posting about this meetup to try and get a bigger audience? If there is, then just maybe paste a link in the chat. That would be really great. Yeah, hopefully we can get even more people. That was it, really.
Yeah, good one, Aris. Yeah, the Angular Discord one is the opposite number of Angular Nation, and we should actually have a little look at that as well. And Aris has also given me a link to a site that registers all the meetups, so we should get into that directory. So thank you, Aris. Good to have you here. Yeah, well connected.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Yeah,
nice to be here.
Thank you. Well, just before we pop off, I just want to particularly thank Dhaval for his first presentation here. I think that shortcut that you've given us is invaluable. I think anybody who uses NX will go, save me an hour's work there. Thanks, Dhaval. So that's good. And thank you, Max, for such a topic that made us talk pretty much all night. That was a good one. And thank you, Val, for your input, because you've demonstrated a full-blown alternative to some things I've been suggesting. And I think, we need that kind of counterpoint.
And thank you, Tom, as well. Don't forget yourself.
Oh, thank you. I nearly did. Okay, that's great. And thank you to all of you for coming up, showing up, and staying the distance. You're still here, and you've got a home to go to.
Awesome.
Right, been a pleasure. Okay, I hope you can come again next time. We'll be doing one in the next month to whatever. It won't be long. Just stay on the channel, and we'll see you there. Thank you. Cheers,
Thank you, guys. Cheers.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Cheers.
Yeah.